Hello, I'm Nicola. I'm here in the Jackson studio to talk about how we make Coates Willow Charcoal. Coates Willow Charcoal began when Percy Coate discovered that you can make some very good quality charcoal using the willow that he'd been growing all his life. The reason he found out about the charcoal was because he was struggling with a bad back. He was lying in front of an open fire. He'd used some willow to start the fire, and the fragments of the willow had fallen on the hearth, and Percy was lying there looking at it thinking, how am I going to save my business? Because willow for baskets was just not being used in the same way that it had been, because the whole industry was in decline, and he was looking for an alternative, and he was thinking, well, I could perhaps use these fragments of charcoal and maybe do something with it. So he started drawing with it on the hearth, found that it was nice and soft. He started experimenting, and lots of trial and error. He found that he could consistently cook the charcoal, and then the next stage was to try and scale it up. So one of the things he did, he went out to a school that were getting rid of some old gas ovens, and he took those back to the house and he installed those, and he gradually got better and better and more consistent with what he was producing. We're talking in the sort of early 60s, all this first experimentation was going on. Really, the whole process hasn't changed since then. It's just become more refined, more efficient, and that's where we are today. A lot of people get the impression that because we're supplying our charcoal all over the world, we supply a lot of artist companies, people assume that we're working out of a big sort of factory premises, whereas actually nothing could be further from the truth. It's in the middle of a little village in the heart of Somerset. The fields where the willow is grown are all within 2 miles of the farm. The farm sits on the top of a hill. Some of the willow is grown at the bottom of the hill. In the charcoal shed, there's a team of guys, some of whom have been with us a long time. When I say the charcoal shed, that's what I mean. That's where we make the charcoal. And then in another area, there's all the guys who process the willow. It's very, very labour intensive. There's a lot of different stages for making the willow ready for baskets and for charcoal making. Some of those guys have been with us sort of over 40 years. It really is more of a farm atmosphere. It's not an industrial site, where we've got a big factory or anything like that. It's more akin to a little cottage industry, which, we're going to work hard to keep it like that, because we see no reason for losing all that, and that's all what makes it enjoyable to do. So in order to make the charcoal, the very first thing we have to do is grow the raw material. We don't import the willow that we use for making charcoal. It's all grown by ourselves. I suppose that's where the real history of the company is the family started growing willow on West Sedgemoor about 200 years ago. So we're quite practiced at it now. We know what we're doing. So in a nutshell, we plant pieces of willow that are around about 20 centimetres long in the springtime. We plant them about a foot apart and about in rows that are about 2 feet apart. So it's very dense planting. That makes the willow grow very tall and straight. After about 3 years of cultivation, each little piece of willow that had been planted will be generating around about 20 rods of willow. And we harvest those rods in the wintertime when the plant is dormant. That's all done by machine. Years and years ago, it used to be done by hand with a hook. That's back-breaking work in the middle of winter. But now it's all done by machine. Once the willow is back at the farm, it's ready for processing. The first thing to do is leave it alone. We let it dry for a couple of months, or really until the summertime, and then we can start processing the dry willow. First of all, we have to grade it so that it comes in different sizes. By the sizes, I mean by height. So we're grading it by height, taking out any of the really sort of fluffy rods that have got lots of side shoots or anything that's been damaged. Those are all removed, and then the graded willow is packed tightly into the willow boiler, where it's boiled for 10 hours. It's a long process, but that process softens the bark, so the bark's removed, the willow's allowed to dry, and then it's ready for going to the charcoal shed, where it will be turned into the charcoal sticks. So in the charcoal shed, the magic happens. The willow is sawn up into regular lengths. If you look at a willow stick, the very one end is very thin, the other end is thick. So that's where we get all the different sizes of the charcoal. So the willow is sawn up into regular lengths. What's at the bottom of the rod is the thick charcoal. What's at the top of the rod is the thin charcoal. So it's all roughly graded, very roughly graded, and packed into metal boxes, these very heavy metal boxes. And then those boxes are filled with sand. And the purpose of the sand is to exclude any oxygen, because if you allow the oxygen in, the whole tin of willow will burn, and it will burn very fiercely, and you'll end up with a tin of ash. So the sand excludes all the oxygen. So once the tins have been cooked and the charcoal's removed, it's ready for grading. And we grade it using a machine that can analyse each piece of charcoal and count it into different bundles. And all the reject charcoal goes into making charcoal powder. So the charcoal powder is the same sort of quality as the sticks, it's just all the reject sticks, the ones that are not quite so pretty, and they are crushed and turned into powder. The last thing to do is pack it into the boxes. It's a final quality check, and the sticks are counted into whatever number they need for the box, wrapped in tissue paper, popped into the box, and then dispatched. It comes to Jackson's, where it can be bought by the artists and make some superb work. So quality control isn't always perfect. Sometimes we miss sticks, and I've just brought a couple along here. This one has been damaged. Although we take the bark off, sometimes the damage can go deeper while the willow is growing. What's happened to this little piece of willow probably is a deer when it's in velvet. Its antlers are itchy, and they relieve that itch by scratching their heads on the willow, and that scars right the way through the bark and into the wood. So when the bark was removed, it still left this little bit of damage here. This is absolutely fine to use. There's no problem with it at all. You just use it as you would any other piece. If you were a basket maker, you would probably reject this rod, because that might be a little bit of an area of weakness and not look very pretty in the basket. But for an artist, it really isn't going to cause a problem at all. You can just carry on using it. The whole process of willow growing is very sustainable. We're growing willow in a very sensitive wetland area in the middle of the Somerset Levels. All of the land that the willow is grown on is designated as sites of special scientific interest. This is mostly because of the overwintering birds that come to feed in the sort of the wet environment. Because of those designations, we're very closely controlled on what we can use in terms of chemicals to help with the willow growing. So we're not allowed to use anything that's harmful. We mustn't harm any of the waterways around the fields. Not that we'd want to anyway, because having lived around the area all our lives, we treasure it probably more than most. But the willow has been grown on the Levels for over 200 years now, and it fits into the environment. It's part of the characteristic of the whole area. And once a willow plant has been put into the ground, it can stay there and generate a crop for 20, 25 years. Without having to be dug up, the ground ploughed again. It's very sustainable. In recent years, we've become very much aware of the energy that is used to make charcoal. We invested in solar energy, and we've got 200 kilowatts of solar panels on the farm, and that helps to sort of reduce the impact of the electricity that we use to make the charcoal. So we use waste willow in a biomass system to create all the heat and the hot water for the whole site. We're very aware of sustainability and investing quite heavily in doing all we can to lessen the impact of charcoal production on the whole planet. The quality of the charcoal comes from the fact that the willow that is used to make the charcoal is just 1 year old. You're using just 1 year of growth, so there's no variation like there would be if you're making it from a big lump of wood that may be 20 years old. When you're drawing with the charcoal, the line that you draw is going to be consistent. You know that if you put the same amount of pressure on the paper, one end of the line is going to look like the other end of the line, and there's not going to be any sort of crumbly bits or bits flaking off. And that's what the artists need to be able to rely on, and that's why they keep going back to our charcoal and to willow charcoal as a whole. Two questions I'm often asked are, first of all, is charcoal water soluble? Which it's not. It's not water soluble, but the charcoal powder is. Charcoal powder can be mixed with water or other liquids to make a paint or a paste. The other question I'm asked about is lightfastness. Charcoal is very lightfast. I mean, pictures have been around for hundreds of years that are made with charcoal. Maybe sometimes the paper might change, but essentially the charcoal is lightfast. There's no getting away from the fact that charcoal is a very dirty, dusty substance. If you think it's messy to use as an artist, you'll just try making it. Certainly when we're jarring the powder, putting the powder into the jars, because this is all done by hand, we wear masks, full face masks, and head straight to the shower when we get home. It's just, where's the shower? It is filthy. And when you're working with it, I mean, I suppose if you are creating a lot of dust and you are conscious of that, maybe wear a mask. The charcoal is tested regularly in terms of whether or not it's hazardous to health. It's tested for the UK market, it's tested for the US market, and every time it comes up as being totally safe. There's nothing nasty in it, so there really is nothing to worry about, other than the fact it makes you dirty. So just have a jolly good wash when you've finished using it. My advice on storing charcoal is to store it somewhere where there's not huge temperature fluctuation, and somewhere dry, and somewhere where it's not going to get crushed. Because if your charcoal's crushed, other than turning it into powder, there isn't really much you can do with it. If you need a nice stick, you need a nice stick. But I would perhaps say the best thing to do is not store it, use it all up, have fun making lots of drawings and enjoy using it.